The United States entered World War II after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. After this bombing, Japan took over many places in Southeast Asia. The Philippines was in a very strategic place because it is located next to all the places Japan had already conquered. This made the conquering of the Philippines very important to the Japanese. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur was very concerned that Japan would take over Manila, a very crucial major city required to completely control the Philippines. Because of this concern, MacArthur decided it would be best to move their forces to the Bataan Peninsula. This ended up being a very costly decision. After many months of fighting, the Japanese eventually defeated the U.S. and Filipino armies. On April 9, 1942, General Edward King Jr. officially surrendered to the Japanese. There were around 76,000 troops that surrendered, 12,000 of which were American. The Japanese were very shocked when they figured out that they had captured 76,000 soldiers, because they were only expecting around 30,000. Because of this, they had to change their plan, as they only had a certain amount of resources. The Japanese commander decided they would move these troops to Camp O'Donnell, which was located over 80 miles away. Japanese soldiers were able to take the train there, but the U.S. and Filipino armies were separated into small groups of 100 to 1,000 soldiers and forced to march the entire way. Throughout the march, soldiers were given little to no food or water. The reason for this is partly because of lack of resources, and partly because of cruelty. This lack of nutrition and the fact that the soldiers were required to march 25 miles a day made them become weak. This meant some started to fall behind, and any soldier who couldn't keep marching or fell too far behind was killed on the spot. Along the way, some Filipino civilians threw small bits of food and water to the soldiers. This definitely helped, but was not enough sustenance to maintain the health of even those lucky enough to get anything. When they got close enough to camp, Japanese soldiers decided to load the prisoners onto trains that were packed so tightly that no one could even sit down. The prisoners that did not fit on the train were forced to march the rest of the way to camp. When the Allied soldiers finally made it to the camp, they were given a small meal of rice. This was the first meal for the majority of them. Throughout the march, there were estimated 1,000 deaths of American soldiers and around 9,000 deaths of Filipino soldiers. Once at the camp, many more soldiers ended up dying due to starvation and disease because of the poor treatment at the camp. The Bataan Death March is significant because it was a result of the Siege of Bataan, which was the first major land battle for the Americans in World War II and one of the most devastating military defeats in American history.